Everybody still awake? Belly's full? I'm going to try not to put you to sleep through this. While things are firing up right here, a couple of things. I firmly believe that today, more so than ever before, weather, water usage, water policy is more important than just about anything in an agricultural community. I not only speak across large portions of Texas, Colorado, New Mexico, but I've also started to branch out farther west to California. California folks and myself don't necessarily see eye to eye on a lot of things, but I think that's a good thing because I can share some things with them that maybe they haven't thought of, and they can do the same for me. And it's been a real growing process for me, and it's something that I've been happy to be a part of. And I keep getting asked back out that way, so I guess they don't hate me too much. But it's a real pleasure to be down here with you guys again. I got hooked up with Rick a few years back up in Amarillo, and he asked me to come down here last year and speak to you guys, and I had a blast doing so. Just simply offering a discussion and sharing ideas. And I'll be the first to tell you guys, I'm not the smartest man when it comes to breaking down weather, climate, or anything. My niche is taking that information and the message and making it meaningful to the agricultural communities or anybody else that's interested in water and weather. And I think that that's something that I've really grown to be proud of. My folks still farm and ranch in eastern Colorado. I lived it, I breathed it, I'm still doing that, and I understand how important it is. So the stuff that I'm going to share with you folks today, some of you may have seen it, some of you may not have. I'm a little edgy, I'm a little raw at times, and I'm brutally honest at times. By that I'm saying I don't have a problem telling you what I think, right or wrong. And I really don't care what you think about that either. And with that in mind, I think we get along just fine. First of all, right down here at the bottom, Weather 5280. I partnered with a couple other folks to create a website, and we do a lot of different long-range and short-range forecasting across the western United States. We're a small-time operation, but again, I think we have some good people involved that really have a personal stake in making weather work for you. So you see this down here, you look this up on Google, you look this up on Twitter, Facebook, whatever you want to do. If you're interested in knowing more about it after the presentation, I'm here all day. I'm staying over at the Overton. You want to hang out and have a drink tonight? Be my guest. I'll be there. You guys ready? Let's roll. I'm going to start out with this, and I'm not going to read it because I'm on the radio today, okay? In the age of fake news, okay, and I work in the media on a daily basis, this right now has never been more true, especially with the advent of the internet. And for those of us that think we have quality information to share and an important message, we have to sort through a lot of the BS that people consume on a daily basis. And it is an extreme amount of work for us to get our message across. I'm not paid by anybody. I don't have an agenda. I don't have a grant, anything. And yet it is still a task every single day to get a good message across. So I think it's more important now than ever than, I don't care how you're getting your information, I care who you're getting your information from. Know your sources, because in today's world, there's an awful lot of charlatans out there trying to snow people for their own gain. Let's look at the current status here across Texas. Drought monitor for Texas That's pretty good shape right now. We got a couple of dry spots. This up here along the Red River had some good rain the other day. A lot of this should be even in better shape when this updates tomorrow. We got a little bit of dryness up in the Panhandle. In general, I don't see any big problems with this, okay, especially for this time of year. And that's a good thing considering where we've been. So if you ask yourself, where have we been over the past several years? Well, we haven't had a lot of this to check out here. This is total precipitation for the last 90 days. And again, you could see some dry spots, you know, depending on where you're located. Some of the drier stuff's up here in North Texas Panhandle. Oklahoma has been in pretty awful shape, really, in terms of dryness. They've actually been bearing the brunt of a regional drought that's actually extended from Oklahoma on up into my backyard in eastern Colorado and western Kansas. But for the most part, most of Texas is in pretty good shape. And I was talking to you guys last night a little bit about the weather that had actually happened, you know, this last weekend. Somebody said, man, we got 1 to 3 inches of rain in January? Yeah, we were running supercell thunderstorms across the Rio Grande, east of Del Rio. That usually isn't a pattern that occurs when you're necessarily concerned about drought, okay, especially this time of year. So I kind of like what I'm seeing so far. What I want to do for you right now is take you back a few years and look at the oceans and where they were. So this is what the oceans looked like January 15th, 2010. What was going on January 15th, 2010 here in Texas? It was wet, right? Late 09, right through early part of 10, boy, it was soggy. And you could see what was going on right here. The North Pacific really wasn't in any particular phase. You know, we were looking at somewhat neutral conditions, one real cool, one real warm. We had a weak El Nino going on right here across the Central Pacific. Overall, we had no problems as far as moisture is concerned. And then it changed. That's what it looked like a year later. January 15th, 2011. Erased was that El Nino. We had a full-blown La Nina episode, all this cooler than average water here across the ENSO regions, and that North Pacific had taken a turn toward a cooler phase as well. Bottom line, when you have all this cooler than normal water here across the Pacific Basin, it was a red flag to me, even when we were wet across the western and southern plains, that something was coming. And that something was going to be fairly significant. So you could see the different types of oceanic patterns here just within a year and how they vary, and just by simple recollection, you know what happened. What happened about the middle part of 10? It shut off. Not just here in Texas, but up in my yard too. This is what she looked like a year later, January 15th to 12. Still cool here in the ENSO regions. North Pacific as a whole, or all the way out here toward Hawaii, off the Baja, we still were bucking a lot of cooler than average water. There was some warmer stuff kind of showing up here northeast of Japan, but in general, right off the coast of North America, we were still dealing with that cooler than normal water, which, and I shouldn't say normal. What is normal anyway, okay? Too much, not enough, divide by 2, and you never get it, right? That's kind of what normal or average is, I think, here in the plains. But in general, you get the idea that we were still dealing with some pretty nasty overall conditions going through 12. And even in the 13, that was January 15th to 13. This cool water, though, was starting to become eroded somewhat, and this warm water here was starting to make some inroads to the northeast. And it's the changes that were taking place here that were really going to set the stage for some pretty nasty things to happen across the western U.S. So that was 13. Look at 14. All right, so I'm going to go back one. Look especially up here, North Pacific. You want to know why California got in a wreck? All you got to do is look right there. That blob of warmer than average water, and not just warmer than average, but a lot warmer than average water, acted essentially as a big old roadblock to any storms that were coming into California. Now, for us in parts of the western and southern plains, this Pacific Basin was actually starting to warm up a little bit here, and our drought situation was actually starting to relax a little bit. It wasn't perfect, but it was starting to relax, and from where we'd been, that was at least a start. Here's 15. Really starting to warm up here across the Central Pacific. This warmer than normal water, same thing. Roadblock. California, terrible shape during this particular time. How about 16? El Nino much? Yep. Real strong El Nino that was going on at that time. North Pacific was still hot. So look at this, just look at the Pacific right there. There's not a whole lot of gradient in terms of sea surface temperature change over a shorter period, time scale, and also over a shorter geographic area or smaller geographic area. So you're really not generating any type of temperature or thermal gradient in the atmosphere to change the weather pattern a whole lot. And by and large, this El Nino was a complete failure to California, especially the southern two-thirds of the state. So when someone says just with a blanket statement, I'm excited about El Nino because that means it's going to rain and snow like crazy in California. Every El Nino is different. Every one of these oscillations is different, especially when they go through their different cycles. Does it tip the odds one way or another? Yeah, probably so. I mean, you can look at the sheer statistics and you can come up with that yourself. But you have to recognize every one of these patterns is a little bit different. So that was obviously last year at this time. That was November 27th, just a couple months ago. You can see we were dealing with cooler than average water here. Look at the North Pacific cooling down. And look at the change just within a couple of months here. Look at the tiers. Warm up here in the Bering Sea. Cool here. Warm here near Hawaii. Cooler here. Look at all the tiers going on here across. Almost like a quad pole, if you will, from north to south. Those gradients, have you guys seen what's going on in California right now? It is insane, the amount of moisture that they're seeing. Colorado, my mountains, they've actually had to close resorts because they have too much snow. They have to take days off so they can position the snow in different places. As this Pacific changes, so do the weather patterns, and it's incredibly important to recognize that. But if you look here, and you might say, well, this whole La Nina thing, what's that about? It's done. It's done. There's no La Nina reflection out there. It is done. So if we look at something which I think is very important, and I've shared this with you before, but just as a refresher, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation and their different phases. This is an oscillation in the Pacific that works on a 20 to 30 year time schedule, okay? And back in, I would say somewhere between 2002 and 2005, we flipped the phase of the PDO from this to this. And that's when we got in trouble with dryness and drought. Recently, really for about the past couple of years, we've taken a little detour from this phase to this. Because those sea surface temperature anomaly maps that I just showed you look a lot more like this than they do like this right now. We haven't had much problem with drought lately. We really haven't. So I quantified these in numbers in terms of an index from the University of Washington. Just something simple, but I think it's really important too, all the way back to 2005. Where you see negative numbers, that's where the PDO was cold or in its negative phase. Where you see positive numbers, that's where she's in her warm phase or positive phase, okay? Doesn't take a genius to figure out when we had problems. Oh, middle of 10, it shut off. Look what happened here. Positive, positive, falls off a cliff all the way through 11, We got a little bit of a bump here, not long. Negative, negative. Oh, look what happens here, early 14. Really positive, record positive, December 15, or December 14, January 15, Feb. We kept it positive, really strongly positive, all of 15, and then early 16, and then look what happened here. We started going back south and then put on the brakes. So last year, when I was talking to you guys, I was talking about the likelihood of a coming La Nina episode and where we might actually have to worry about a little bit of drought coming back. And it was predicated based on this thing right here that happened. So when I talked to you last year, we were here, and I was looking at this likely going to happen and keep going south. Hasn't happened. That's a good thing. I'm not afraid to admit I was wrong. It's just part of learning. Absolutely. And this trend to have put on the brakes from our PDO going negative and cold, do I think that that's going to continue in the short term? Yeah. But I really worry about what happens in the long term, because history suggests when we come off of one of these detours here from the prevailing longer term pattern, the decadal pattern, we will inevitably likely go back to some of these numbers here that gave us so many problems. So while things are okay right now, I'll tell you what, it really behooves you and anybody else that's interested in water, agriculture, water policy, so on and so forth, to have your stuff together. Now is the time to have that stuff together, not when we go back to this business here. The Atlantic has a similar oscillation as well. And for Texas, it does play a role. For me in Colorado, it does at times, but I mean for the most part since '05, you see a lot more positive numbers here than negative. But where you do see some negative numbers here, that's where we've actually been in pretty good shape in terms of moisture. So whenever that Pacific is warm and the Atlantic is cool, we don't have much drought worries here. And recently that's kind of been the pattern. These maps right here, McCabe came up with these in 2004. It's really some brilliant stuff, in my opinion. Not that it's a perfect roadmap, but it really gives you an idea in terms of planning and going forward when these oceans are operating in their different phases, what type of impact that it could potentially have. Now for my area, I have to worry about this red business about 75% of the time. That's just part of farming and ranching in eastern Colorado. You know, who wants to farm and ranch in the desert? Okay, well, evidently a lot of people, because that's what we do. Is it the smartest thing? No, it's not the smartest thing. The smartest thing is to understand how timely rains make things work for you, how timely water usage makes things work for you, and how water conservation makes things work for you. If you understand those things, you can live a pretty good life in the plains. You're going to go through dirt storms, you're going to go through drought, you're going to go through some really hard times at times. But the more you equip yourself with that knowledge, the better you're able to weather those types of things. All right? So, when we look at the pattern that got us in trouble, it's this down here. Pacific was cold, Atlantic was warm. All that red simply means is drought frequency is enhanced. We detoured what? Over here. It's kind of where we've been recently. All right? Now this Atlantic oscillation, when it fully flips its decadal phase and goes from warm to cold, I believe we will enter a period of time like this right here, which generates some pretty bad hardships up here across the western high plains. A lot of Texas, that drought signal may relax, but up here for the Panhandle, northeast of Mexico, eastern Colorado, right up here, it's an issue. One of the reasons that I went to California is because I really wanted to understand why they were so screwed up. Why was their policy so screwed up? Not just dismiss it, understand it. What could they be doing better? What is California's problem right now? It's the same problem everywhere has. There's more people using more water now than ever before. Ever. So, in order to understand better where my state was headed, that's why I went to California. Because I know in Colorado, if we don't get this figured out, all we have to do is look a couple states to the west, and that's exactly where we're going to be. Texas, you think you're immune? Who's moving into your state right now? You think you're immune, Texas? You're full of it if you think you're immune to it. Where are your population centers? Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin. You want to talk about water policy with those folks? You go ahead. You want to dismiss those folks? You go right ahead, at your own peril. The more you work with them to help them understand you, I want you to understand them. I think it's even more important. So it's easy to dismiss folks just because they don't agree with you and just because you don't think you're ever going to reach them. But I'll tell you what, I've had some awful good conversations with some California folks that I never even thought they'd give me the time of day. So I encourage you to outreach, and I encourage you to do that because essentially the fate of agriculture and agricultural water usage, in my opinion, lies with just that. Because I'll tell you what, on the northern front range of Colorado, Denver, Boulder, Fort Collins, if we go through a drought like I think is possible in Colorado in the coming years, not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but in the coming years, and we set something up like this, and we go through 4 or 5 year period with below average snowpack and increasing people moving in, increased population, do you really think that a 40-year-old housewife lives in South Denver going to turn on her faucet and not have water come out of it? Do you really think that's going to happen? Or do you think we might have some irrigation issues out on the eastern plains of Colorado? Where are they going to get that water? Ag. Know what you're doing. Outreach, understanding. Your livelihood depends on it, especially if we go through something like this, at least up in my hood, like what California's done, all right? Don't think you're immune to those problems, because they are right there in front of your face. Let's look at El Nino and see what's going to happen here. These are probabilities. I know this map, this graph isn't in your book, but it's kinda, and I'll walk you through a little bit here. Green over here is neutral, neither El Nino or La Nina. Percentages, February, March, and April, well, we're pretty much there right now. Good chance we're neutral? Well, duh, because we are neutral right now, okay? Red, El Nino, low chances of that happening. Oh, until we get over here toward summertime and in the fall, our probabilities go up there about 35% of an El Nino actually reappearing during that time. La Nina, done. We're down here a little bit. We're pretty much done with that. I don't see La Nina coming back, at least for this year. Now, I want to qualify this by saying ENSO prediction. And when I say ENSO, I'm saying El Nino and the Southern Oscillation. It's the pattern of an El Nino or La Nina, or whether you're neutral or whatever you want to call it. Our predictability this time of year isn't exactly great, but we can already look at the sea surface temps that I showed you, and you can see that the La Nina is basically gone. All right, so we can kind of look at what's happening right now and project forward, especially with how the ocean is set up. So I'm not necessarily saying that we're going to have an El Nino in 2017, but I'm not necessarily saying we aren't either. I'm saying that it's possible. and I'll show you why. This is our own government model. Who's a fan of computer models in here? Yeah, I didn't think so. Okay? I get you why, too. I understand. A lot of the models they struggle at times, okay? Especially here in the United States. Europeans have some pretty good stuff going on over there right now. And the Americans are trying to essentially copy that going forward. Never before has weather forecasting been better. You guys agree with that? Or do you think it's just a bunch of crap? What do you guys think? I heard you guys talking about it earlier. You think it's trash? Yeah, okay. A lot of you do. I'm okay with that. You're not going to hurt my feelings any. I got to skin an alligator, man. Climate forecasting? Whew. Now we're really going off the rails, right? A lot of times we just keep running the same data. You know what the definition is of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, but expecting a different result. There's a lot of that going on right now, okay? But just work with me a little bit here. I showed you what was going on with our oceans presently. So let's take a little peek here in the future and see what's happening. This is probably the least accurate model I'm going to show you. So why are you showing it, Brian? That's pretty stupid. Well, because I just want to share it with you, that's all. Right out here in the Central Pacific, what you're looking at is sea surface temperature forecast by this particular model. And it is forecasting some sort of weak El Nino event to arrive by late summer and possibly into early fall. Is this out of whack? I don't necessarily think it is. Does it mean we're going to see an El Nino? Maybe not. But here's the thing. It's not always about what it is. With me, a lot of times, it's about what it isn't. We don't have cold water out here. The longer we go without having colder than average water out there in those key areas, the longer we're going to be okay. So don't always look at it and say, oh, is there an El Nino coming? It isn't always about an El Nino. Look at California. We're neutral conditions right now, and they've got more snow and moisture than they know what to do with. So again, it isn't always about that kind of thing. Keep that in mind. Here's another computer model. This is a multi-model ensemble. This isn't just one. This takes a lot of different models into consideration that are looking at the same thing. They're also looking at sea surface temperatures. There's a warm tongue coming right off the west coast of South America. Same time frame. This is for August, okay? It's looking at the same thing. Don't focus that there's warm water there. Just know that there isn't cold water there. And the probabilities of there not being cold water there are high. And that's a good thing. This is a model from Japan, the Jamstack model. Same thing. Not exactly gangbusters El Nino, but not colder than average either. All right? So we've got multiple different models looking at the same thing. Some of them say El Nino, some of them say not. Some of them just keep it neutral. None of them say colder than average water in the Pacific. That, my friends, I think is the message you need to take home with you tonight. Let's look at what this multi-model ensemble has to say. And again, these are just models, okay? I'm just sharing them with you. That's all. Because I think it's a little important that you understand what I'm looking at. But this is February's forecast here. Where you're seeing the greens, that's good. Where you're seeing the reds, nah, not so much. That's the dry stuff, okay? But it keeps California relatively wet. Western Colorado pretty wet. This dryness down here in southeast Texas along the Gulf Coast, I'm not necessarily sure I agree with that. Houston had over 6 inches of rain last night. Gulf Coast is going to be pretty soggy, okay? So this is, again, for February. This isn't right now. So, I mean, we could have a little bit of change. And I'm a little concerned that we might get a little bit of ridging out here on the western part of the country that tends to shut off the storm track a little bit, at least temporarily. But I'm okay with that as long as it's temporary. There's not a lot driving us right now to keep one particular dominant weather pattern locked in, And that's good. It means our weather patterns are going to be variable. Or, as some of you old-timers would think, that's just kind of how it used to be. Let's look at March. March is critical for a lot of reasons. Little bit of brown right here, nothing crazy, all right? Like I said, Oklahoma's been dry for a while, so this wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility. But there's not necessarily any stout, dominant dry signal here in the plains. For those of you just playing along, you can see the scale up here where we're talking about white, again, is average, whatever that is in your backyard. But I think the wettest time will be up here into the Great Lakes, which would suggest a pattern like this with the jet stream, okay? Something like this. The problem would be is if it lasted in April. Good moisture tap here coming through Texas. Really know that brown or orange in Texas. California might start to dry out a little bit, but again, nothing that's stout and persistent. Maybe a little bit of dryness in my backyard, but I'm not ready to sign off on that yet either. Let's go forward to May. Little dryness in East Texas. Still some moisture coming across here. These little periods of dryness in here are awful flashy. And are most commonly would be flash drought, flash dryness, whatever you want to call it. I don't worry about the flashy stuff. The stuff that's regional and gets a foothold on a regional basis and lasts and is persistent, that's what we have to be concerned about. Business that just kind of comes and goes. Here's June. We're getting way out here, all right? We're talking pretty much 6 months from now. If anybody knows anything about statistics, you know that the farther you go out into the future, obviously, just by sheer statistics, the less accurate you're likely going to be. So these farther out maps, I would take with a little bit of a grain of salt and just pay attention. July, same thing, some spotty dryness here and there. Monsoon tap coming up through New Mexico and Colorado. Nothing that's terribly awful regionally, okay? Here's another model. This one had me a little concerned. March, April, May. It's got a pretty stout dry bullseye here across Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and dips down here in the northern parts of Texas. Not huge, but it's still there. So it has me a little bugged because if that did happen, it would happen at a pretty inopportune time for a lot of us as we head into the springtime. I'm not saying that this is reality, but what I am saying is that it concerns me a little bit. Kind of a wait and see thing. See how this pattern shakes out in February. If we are dry in February, that would concern me a little more, that the pattern may last a little longer. Just be prudent with what you're doing until we kind of wrestle this and figure it out. Because it goes away. June, July, August. Sea surface temperatures right now in the Gulf of Mexico, if you didn't see on that map that was before, are really warm. It's really warm in the Gulf right now. If the Pacific is warm, Gulf of Mexico is warm, a lot of times we don't have to worry about dryness here. Tropics can fire up. I think maybe that's what this model is trying to project here. I mean, if you look at this model, it's saying all of Texas is in green, so is Oklahoma, eastern Colorado, Kansas. Basically, where that dry bullseye was for March, April, May, it's the complete opposite as we go into summer. If that dry bullseye was still there, I think we'd have some trouble. Okay? Variability, I think, is the real key in the message, what I'm talking about here. And that's September, October, November. Again, long ways out. Just wanted to share it with you. But nothing stout here in terms of dryness anywhere. And I think that's a testament to the model latching on to the fact that the ocean is warm out there. Doesn't necessarily mean El Nino, but because it's warm, I worry terribly about moisture. Okay? So bottom line, the next 6 months. La Nina's done. Lingering pattern effects, perhaps for some, but nothing crazy. Nothing that's going to be sustained. I'm less worried about extended drought given the La Nina death and the PDO still being positive. I think that's a good thing. That doesn't necessarily mean we have to go to El Nino to be in a good shape, but it's at least on the table a little bit later in 17 from what I've showed you, okay? Short-term flashy drought, I think, is probably going to be our biggest problem. You know, you might go through a 3-month period like, man, I didn't get any rain. You're like, it doesn't matter what your neighbor's getting, right? If you're not getting any, then nobody is. So you have to keep that in mind. As long as it's flashy, it may cause some short-term problems, but nothing crazy that we can't work through and come out better on the other side. Because most of the models and really the overall pattern, and if you understand what this pattern means from a historical standpoint, it usually means we don't have problems here with dryness. Does that mean that we couldn't come across some rogue year that bucks the trend? Of course. I mean, it's the future. Even that, as confident as I am in what I do and what I know, it's the future. You have to recognize that it may not work out that way. It may buck history. It may buck what the models are saying. So, I mean, it's something that you have to keep in mind. And because of that, I always tell my family, based on what we do, and I've been making decisions for them agriculturally when it comes to weather for a long time. And you always got to be smart with that. I mean, don't overextend yourself. Utilize the pattern for what it is. But when you do that and you overextend yourself, obviously you get into trouble because there is still some uncertainty with what happens in the rest of 17. All right? So you have to be careful at least a little bit about that. That's my email. Please contact me anytime you like. Okay? If you got questions, if you hated everything that I did up here today, let me know. Drop me a line. I want feedback. I want to know what you guys are interested in. I'm on Twitter a lot. So if you guys are on Twitter, it's an excellent way to communicate. It's just not about sharing cat photos and such, okay, like Facebook is. And if you need weather for your biz, just ask me for a quote. Like I said, I think we're doing some really good things here at weather5280.com, both in the short term and the long term. And we do focus on Texas for long-range forecast information. So if you're interested in just checking that out, go to the website and give it a look-see. But that's really what I wanted to share with you guys today. Any questions or anything, Cam, or we got to move on? What's that? We got a minute? It's my experience, especially up in Colorado, and granted we see crazy hail there all the time, but if you've got moisture in the soil going into spring, you're probably going to have some severe weather because those storms can tap that moisture out of the soil, they can utilize it locally, and they can feed on it, versus if your soil is dry. And I know you guys work with the dry line here on a daily basis in the spring as it fluctuates back and forth. But if you're dry in eastern New Mexico and you're dry in West Texas, what happens is every day that it heats up, it bakes that ground every day just that much more than the day before. The wind starts a little bit sooner every day. It shoves that dry line farther east, and then you're looking at severe weather potential east I-35 instead of west. But the fact that we're getting moisture now, New Mexico's getting moisture now, they got a lot of snow out west, so that regional foothold or that regional footprint of that drought can't get established right now. And so severe weather season rolls around, I'd be a little more concerned about hail, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. I don't think that there's nearly enough being done with it. I could have given a whole presentation today just simply on the sun, what I think about what's going on with that. I don't think it's necessarily understood very well, and I think it would be really foolish of us to think that solar cycles, sunspots, or whatever don't have any impact on us from a weather standpoint. In fact, I think that's completely stupid. But that's just my opinion. What impact does it have on us? I don't think we necessarily know. I think that, I can always remember my dad telling me, he's like, oh, I can see the northern lights tonight. That must mean a storm's going to happen, in the next X amount of days or whatever. Call it folklore, call it reality, whatever it is. But I've started to pay significantly more attention to the fact that when the sun is active, or it's flaring, or it lets off a flare, I haven't done the hardcore research on it, but I think it has an effect on amping some of our storms up here on the planet. Absolutely. What happens when the sun goes to sleep? Historically speaking, and by going to sleep I mean is inactive or putting out less radiation, this planet cools. And we've seen that through history with different minimums as far as solar cycles are concerned. Okay? Did that touch on kind of what you wanted to know? Okay. Good information, something you've never seen before, let me know. Okay? Because like I said, I'm interested in what you guys think. Thank you, guys.